Hey, I'm Lauren. Welcome back to the Work From Home Center. I am 37 weeks pregnant, and today we are going to be doing a freezer meal prep for postpartum. Now, this is baby number 2 for me, and one thing that I really regret not doing in our first pregnancy is meal prepping a ton of food before baby came. We were really lucky to have a ton of family that brought food for us, but now we moved 1,000 miles away from family, and so it is critical that we have meals prepared for postpartum, especially having a toddler to chase after as well. These meals were chosen specifically because they have tons of healing ingredients for mama postpartum, but more importantly, they will be flavorful and meals that your family is actually going to want to eat. Now, most of these meals can be doubled or tripled pretty easily, so make sure to do that if you really want to fill your freezer with a ton of food. And a lot of this can also be done in one day. There's a few things that you'll want to prep a day or two beforehand, but those things can also be purchased from the store if you choose not to make those from scratch. In the end, if you follow exactly what I did, you'll have at least 2 weeks of meal prepped food along with some snacks and some goodies like cookies to snack on postpartum as well. So like I mentioned, all of these are made from scratch, but if you stumbled upon this channel and this is your first time scratch cooking, or you're just not interested in making everything from scratch, don't worry. You can still do this meal prep and purchase some of the stuff from the store. So for example, we'll be making some bone broth, but if that's too much for you or you just don't have time, go ahead and purchase it from the store. Make it easy on yourself. But if you're feeling adventurous and you want to learn a new skill, go ahead and try all the recipes as is. And with that, let's go ahead and get started and let's get some meal prep done. All right, so first up on our list are the sourdough breakfast bagels. Now, I specifically chose sourdough bagels because of the benefits of sourdough. However, if you don't have an active starter going, you can absolutely use regular store-bought yeast. There are tons of great bagel recipes using yeast. I will link both in the description below so that you have options. Now, I totally had a brain fart and didn't record me making the actual dough, but it is pretty simple. It's just a little bit of flour, sourdough starter, salt, and water, and a little bit of sweetener. I chose honey. I let that ferment overnight, and then I went ahead and I rolled them into the bagel shape. Now, I like to kind of wrap it around my hand and roll it so that it becomes kind of molded together, and that will help keep the shape. And remember that these are going to expand a little bit overnight when we put them in the fridge to ferment a little bit longer. So just make sure that you're keeping an eye on the size, that they will get a little bit bigger both in the fermenting stage and when we boil them later. Next up, I am prepping the bacon for the bagel sandwiches. We chose bacon because that's the breakfast meat we like, but you can absolutely do a breakfast sausage or any other kind of meat that you would like on your breakfast sandwich. I really like to do my bacon on a baking sheet and stick it in the oven at 450 for roughly 20 minutes or so. It really depends on how crispy you like it and just kind of how your oven cooks. But typically I just lay it out on a sheet. The grease that kind of comes out from cooking all of that bacon will make sure that it doesn't stick, and I just flip it halfway through so that I can make sure that it gets crispy on all ends. So I like it really crispy, but certainly just kind of keep an eye on it and see when you think it's done per your liking. But it is a super easy way to meal prep a bunch of bacon really quickly. Switching gears a little bit, we are going to strain the bone broth that I put in the Instapot the night before. I had it going on high for about 16 hours, and I just used a rotisserie chicken from Costco. You'll see me pick it a little bit later in this video for some of the meals that we're making. But bone broth is such a great healing food for postpartum. It has a lot of great nutrients, and the collagen in it is really great to help reduce inflammation. So we will be incorporating this into a lot of the meals that we're making today. I won't go into super specific details on how to make bone broth. I actually have a video already on my channel on how I make bone broth. So if you want to check that out, that'll go into great detail on making it yourself. The next item that we're prepping are black beans. Now we're going to be using this for 2 recipes. You could absolutely use canned beans, but I think that homemade black beans taste just so much better. You can flavor it however you want, and you can skip the added sugar that's traditionally in flavored black beans. Plus, we're going to add a little bit of the bone broth that we just made to the black beans just to double up on our bone broth intake. I added an onion, some garlic, bone broth, a little bit of water, some paprika, taco seasoning, and 1 chipotle pepper. I pressure cook this for 2 hours on high, and that seems to be a pretty good amount of time to get all of the beans cooked. I do not soak them beforehand, and so I love the Instant Pot to make beans because it is such a quick way to make them. The last thing that we want to prep are all of our veggies. So these veggies are going to be awesome, great flavor enhancers to all of our dishes. And it's super important to get them prepped before we start making our meals because it'll just make everything go super quick and super fast. So for the carrots, I am just peeling them and I am cutting them in half lengthwise. And then if they're a thicker carrot, I might do another cut in half. But most of them I just started to do horizontally and then just kind of dice them into cubes. You want to make them all about the same size so that they cook evenly. And these are only going to go into our chicken pot pies. So we don't need a ton of them. I probably did maybe about 6 or so carrots. It really depends on how carroty you like your pot pie. I think the great thing about all of these veggies is you can really add or subtract the amount that you want just based on what you like in your dish and what you want it to be more forward with. You'll also see that I do not waste the skins and the ends of the carrots. I put those into a freezer bag so that we can make bone broth again later on. This is a really great way to make bone broth or any kind of broth on the cheap because we're just using items that we've already prepped or we were going to throw out anyways, and now they can be repurposed and make very flavorful bone broth and reduce a ton of waste. Next up, we're going to chop up the peppers for the chicken tortilla soup as well as the chili. I like the dice size and I also just used a variety of colors because that's what we prefer, but whatever's on sale is definitely going to be a great flavor add. You could also substitute some poblano peppers, anything that doesn't have a lot of spice because we will be adding spice in later. Now I am just chopping up some fresh cilantro and parsley. Now I think that when you can find herbs for cheap, and parsley and cilantro tend to be on the cheaper side, and you can get them in a high quantity, it is super important to add them to the dish. They add such a great, vibrant flavor. And we're going to chop them up ahead of time, and we're just going to place them into a paper towel in a bag, so that way if for some reason you have to do this the next day or you just don't get to it right away, they stay nice and fresh. It'll absorb a lot of the moisture that comes off herbs, and that way when we go to put them in the dish, they will be absolutely fresh and vibrant. Next up are the potatoes, which are going to go into the chicken pot pie. Now I dice these pretty small because I like smaller potatoes in my chicken pot pie, and they also cook a little bit faster when they are smaller. Now my best tip for potatoes is just to wash them and keep the skins on for almost everything I make. Now the skin has such great nutrients, and when we peel it off, we're missing out on a lot of that potassium and other good vitamins and minerals that are in the skin. So if you don't mind a little bit of skin, they are a great addition, and it also is going to save you a ton of prep time by not having to peel it. Quick pit stop just to take a look at our beans that are done in the Instapot. Now, a lot of this stuff we're going to be doing in simultaneously, so we had these cooking in the background while we were chopping our veggies. And then we're going to switch gears to chopping our onions. Now, I was absolutely crying by the end of these onions. I know there's like some other tricks and that you can use like goggles and all these other things. I just kind of try to do the speediest way I can get them done, and that seems to work for me. But these are all going to be diced in the same size, which makes it really easy and convenient. And I'm just going to throw these all in a bag once I am done chopping them up. Next up is garlic, and for this I had a super awesome helper. I love when I can get my son involved in cooking, and I know like as less than a 2-year-old you might get a little bit nervous having them help with knives, but we've been really diligent about showing my son how to use a knife properly, and we're always there to help control the knife as well. And I really think that just kind of implementing and encouraging these skills early on is how you can teach a lot of the safe practices and really just encourage the enjoyment of cooking as well. Next, we're going to grate the ginger for the chicken saag, which is a really amazing Indian dish with tons of warm spices and super easy to put together. And fun fact, you don't actually have to peel the ginger before you grate it. I recently just learned this, and I hope to pass that on to you to save some time as well. And then we're also going to pick the chicken that's going to go into the chicken tortilla soup as well as the chicken pot pie. And we use these carcasses to make the bone broth earlier on in the video. You can always just save it for later too. If you don't have time to make the bone broth now, you can just throw it in the freezer and use it with all those veggie scraps that you saved earlier on in the video. So it is now the next day and we are going to boil and bake our bagels. Now I did decide to break this meal prep up into a few days only because we had just moved 1,000 miles and we were still settling into this rental and had a lot of unpacking to do. And I just really want to spend some quality time with my family, especially before baby number 2 arrives and it'll get a little bit chaotic. But you can absolutely do all of this prep in one day, but you'll see me kind of have a few outfit changes because I did take my time a little bit. So we are just going to boil the bagels, and then we are going to, after we take them out of the bath, they will get a little bit of an egg wash on them. And then I put some everything but the bagel seasoning on there, but you could totally do cheese, leave them plain. You could really do any kind of seasoning that you like on there. And then I put them in the oven at 425 for about 25 minutes. So you'll want to just keep an eye on them and see where they get from a golden brown perspective, and just make sure that they are cooked all the way through. And then one last veggie prep because, oops, I forgot it the day before, but we don't want to forget about our jalapeno peppers. Now, if you don't like spice, you don't have to put these in there, but I do think that they add a really good amount of flavor. But we are just going to chop these up and dice them into the smallest amount that we can. I took out the seeds because while we do like spice, I don't want it to get crazy spicy, and I want my toddler to eat it too. But obviously, whatever your spice level comfort is, you can keep or take away the seeds or reduce the amount of jalapenos that we add to these dishes as well. All right, friends, so we are finally to the main event. Thank you for sticking with me. We're going to start with the chicken tortilla soup, and we're going to put a little bit of olive oil in the pan. You could also use butter. I put onions and the peppers that we chopped up. And a reminder, all of the amounts will be in the recipes in the description below. I'm going to put a little bit of garlic in there, and then the jalapeno peppers that we chopped up. Again, you can add as little or as much as you want to here. And then we're going to give it a nice little stir and let these saute for a few minutes. You want to get the flavors all kind of married together and get a little bit of just kind of color on those veggies as well. So now we're going to add in the bone broth that we made the day before. And as you can see, I have a little mesh strainer kind of connected to the pot. And this is just helping do a little additional straining. So sometimes when we have all the veggies and the bones, there can be a little bit of sediment that settles down after you let it sit for a little bit. And this just helps make it a much smoother broth experience. You could also use a cheesecloth or something else if you don't have a little strainer like this. So now we are going to add in our paprika, our taco seasoning, and I also add in a little bit of salt because I don't salt my bone broth when I store it, so it doesn't have any salt in it. But if you're using store-bought bone broth, you may not need to salt it at this point. Definitely just taste it and see how you like it. I definitely like a saltier soup, so I don't mind a little bit of extra salt in there. And then we're also going to add in those herbs that we chopped up the day before. So in this case, the cilantro. And oh my goodness, after I added the cilantro in here, the flavor was just absolutely amazing. And after it cooked down a little bit more, it was just even better. Lastly, we're going to add in all of the chicken that we picked the night before, the black beans that we made in the Instapot, and a little bit of frozen corn as well. Now, I let this simmer for a couple of hours while I was cooking everything else, just to let all of the flavors really kind of marry together, but whatever you have time for is really going to be fine because we're going to cook this again on super low heat when we end up making it postpartum. Next up, we are making the filling for the chicken pot pies, and we're going to start with a whole stick of butter and melt it all up, and then we're going to toss in our onions so that they can saute for a little bit, and then we'll also throw in our garlic and then our potatoes as well. And this is also where you would want to put in your carrots. I forgot to put them in until the end, and you'll see me toss them in a little bit later, but definitely put them in now so they can start to cook down a little bit. And then we're going to add in our diced potatoes. Now this is what's going to take the longest to cook and get soft. So we definitely want to give it a little bit of time, and we want to marry it with all of those flavors of the onions and the garlic and the carrots too. And then don't forget to add the salt. No one likes an unsalted potato. And then we want to add in our flour. So to make a roux, you always want to do equal parts fat to equal parts flour. So in this case, we put in a stick of butter, which is a half a cup of butter. And then we want to put a half a cup of flour, and then you want to mix it around. If you have a whisk, that's awesome. In this case, I had just a little spatula, but it mixed up just fine. But a whisk will always make sure that it is not as clumpy. And then once you have your kind of flour roux put together, that's when you want to add in your liquid. And for this recipe, I am putting in about 2 cups of bone broth and then about 2 cups of heavy cream. And you may want to add a little more or a little less depending on how thick you like your gravy in your pot pie, and just kind of depending on how many vegetables you end up with the pan. You might want it to be a little bit thinner or a little bit thicker. And then at this point, we want to add in the rest of our veggies, which is our frozen corn and our frozen peas. You could use canned versions of this, but I find that the integrity of the veggie kind of holds up a little bit more and doesn't get as mushy when we use the frozen version. And then we want to add in the rest of the rotisserie chicken as well here. And then you can see me adding in the carrots I mentioned that I forgot to put in earlier. And we are also putting in the chopped parsley that we chopped up the day before and unwrapping it from that paper towel. And that adds a really nice fresh flavor. Then give that a good stir. Make sure that the heat is on low and let that cook for another like 15 to 20 minutes. Just keep an eye on it. Keep stirring it. Make sure that it doesn't stick to the bottom. But that way we make sure our filling is nice and cooked for when we put it in the pie dough. Next up is the chili, which we're going to make in the Instapot. I put on the saute function and put in 4 pounds of ground beef. You could use ground chicken, ground turkey, whatever you prefer here. And then I'm also putting in about 1/4 of a cup to 1/2 of a cup of ground up liver. Now, I know you guys are going to maybe cringe or like not want to put that in there, but I promise once you put in all the other flavors here, you aren't going to taste it. And it is going to be so, so good for healing postpartum, and all the nutrients if you're breastfeeding are going to get into baby, which is going to be awesome too. Then we're going to put in 4 to 5 pieces of cut up bacon. This will add a really nice flavor, and we want to get these nice and crispy. And then we're going to put in our diced up jalapenos and our diced up peppers from the day before, our onions, and some garlic as well. And then we're going to want to put in about 2 cups of bone broth too. So again, we're going to be putting this bone broth in almost everything. It has such great healing properties and just tons of great flavor. Then we're going to put in a total of 24 ounces of tomato sauce. I put in 4 of these 8-ounce containers that I canned earlier in the year, and it was really exciting to be able to use the tomato sauce from my own garden. And then we're going to put in the rest of our spices. So we're going to put in paprika and taco seasoning. And then we're going to also put in the rest of our black beans. Now you can put as little or as much as you want in here. We are kind of like, we like a little bit of a lighter bean chili just because for some reason, I just feel like we have a hard time digesting beans. So we don't like it too bean forward, but definitely if you're a huge bean chili fan, add them all in. Now I am just baking up the tortilla soup in our Ziploc freezer bags. Now I let it cool completely. I don't like to put warm food or liquids into plastic, and that will just kind of help it freeze a little bit better and more nicely. You want to make sure that when you seal it up that there is as little air as possible in the bags, because obviously air is the enemy of anything in the freezer. So just make sure that it is sealed up nice and tight. And I chose to lay them all flat. I think it's a little bit easier for storage. So now we are switching gears back to making the breakfast sandwiches. So I just put 18 eggs into a bowl, and then I also had some leftover egg whites from the night before when I made some ice cream. I didn't want them to go to waste, so I threw them in here. So that's totally optional, but it does add a little extra protein to the egg sandwiches. And then I just put them onto a well-greased baking sheet. Now I used the bacon grease from the day before, so it's a really great way to kind of reuse some grease. And I do wish, however, that I had put some parchment paper down. I think next time I will do that. It was a little bit of a pain to clean up the eggs afterwards, but I also lost track of time and overcooked them a bit. So I think a combination of keeping track of the time a little bit better and maybe parchment paper, we would have a lot less cleanup at the end. So this is the part where you hold your breath and hope that you don't spill egg all over your oven. Thankfully, I did not. I absolutely did not want to clean that up. But just obviously walk it very carefully to your oven and scoot it in there so you don't spill. Now we're going to mix up our honey mustard mayo for the bagels while the eggs cook. And this is totally optional. I'm honestly not even sure how these are going to hold up on the bagels. I've read mixed things on freezing mayo. However, because these are for postpartum, I'm going to take the chance because I want something super easy that I can just throw in the microwave or the oven and not have to think about putting a sauce on there. So we are going to take 1 egg, a little bit of lemon juice, some vinegar, and a healthy heaping of both mustard powder and honey. So you'll want to do this to taste. Then we're going to take our avocado oil and our immersion blender, and we're going to blend it up. And I just pour my olive oil until I get the consistency that I want. But generally it's about a cup per egg. But definitely just do it until you get the consistency that you would like. So now for the assembly of the breakfast sandwiches, I cut each bagel open and put a little bit of mayo on there. And then I cut the eggs into 12 even slices and I put them on the bagel. Some are a little bit bigger than the bagel, but no worries. And then I put 1 slice of bacon on each. I closed it up and I wrapped it in the plastic wrap. And then I put the bagels into freezer bags so that they had a little bit of extra protection while sitting in the freezer. Once the chili has cooled, you can go ahead and put them in the freezer bags. I did 4 separate bags, approximately 1 pound of beef per bag, and then I laid them flat and sucked out all the air as well. So now it is time to prep the last meal, which is the chicken saag. So I chopped up a bunch of chicken thighs that I got from Costco. Now I honestly hate cutting up chicken. I don't know what it is. I just don't like it. But I did it because I love chicken saag. But if I had sharp chicken shears, like some scissors, I would totally have used them here instead of cutting them up. It would have went so much faster. But unfortunately, the kitchen shears in this rental are not very sharp. So I had to use a knife. But you just want to chop them up into bite-sized pieces and they will cook down when we put them in the skillet. To cook the chicken, you're going to want to get a hot skillet. I really like my cast iron because I feel like it just cooks everything really nicely. I dumped the chicken in there and I cooked it for probably about 6 to 8 minutes, just until it's done. And it doesn't have to be fully cooked because we are going to put it back in the sauce that we're going to make and let it cook and simmer a little bit longer there. And then we're going to want to remove the chicken once it's done. I just put it onto a plate. And then we're going to add in the onions. And now this is roughly about 2 onions. I really like a strong onion flavor in my chicken saag. Next, we're going to put in the spices, which are the real stars of the dish. So we're going to put in garam masala, coriander, cardamom, and turmeric. Optionally, you can put in a little bit of spice in either red chili pepper flakes or just chili powder, which not to be confused with like a Mexican chili powder, but actual ground up chilies. I chose not to make this a spicy dish just because the two of the other dishes that we were making this week were also spicy, so I just wanted to have a little bit of variation in spice, but definitely this is a really great dish to make a little bit spicy. Then you're going to want to stir the spices and let them kind of get aromatic and cook on low. And then you're going to want to add in a little bit of tomato sauce. I did 8 ounces. You could also use some tomato paste here. We're going to be adding in the coconut milk later on, which will dilute the tomato paste if you choose that. And then lastly, we are going to want to put in the spinach. So I did about a half of the size of a Costco bag, but you can really do as much or as little as you want. The spices will really mask the spinach flavor if you are not a big spinach fan. Once the spinach has wilted, you're going to want to add the coconut milk. Now, I always opt for full fat coconut milk. I think that it has a little bit more flavor than the light version. So just make sure when you're grabbing in the store that you grab the full fat. And I tried it at this point, and it was at that point that I realized I totally forgot to put the ginger in. And so I added it in here. It's ideally better when you're putting in all of the rest of the spices so that it can kind of get that aromatic flavor going as well, but it still added an awesome punch to the dish, and I am super excited about it. The next thing you're going to want to do is blend up this sauce in a blender. Now, I highly recommend a blender. It will blend it a lot better than an immersion blender, but an immersion blender will still work, and that's what we used for years before we could afford a blender. Fun fact, the immersion blender I have, we actually got at Goodwill in our early 20s for like $3.99, and it has lasted all these years, and it is still going strong. Once your sauce is completely blended, you can add back in your chicken and let it simmer for about 15 to 20 minutes and then let it cool. Once it's cooled, you can put it into your freezer bags, and this I put into 2 separate freezer bags, and we will serve this over rice when we eat it. Next, we are going to make our freezer granola bars. Now, these ingredients in the granola bars are going to be really great if you choose to do breastfeeding. A lot of the ingredients are known to be helpful to help produce milk supply. So into the bowl, we are going to put about 3 cups of oats, some chia seeds, some flax seeds, as well as some pepitas. And then we will also put a little bit of honey for sweetener. I also put in a little bit of maple syrup just to kind of change the flavor of the sweetener, but certainly you can do one or the other if you don't have both on hand. And then we added in about a half a cup of melted coconut oil as well as a half a cup of peanut butter. Now, I chose to do coconut oil in lieu of butter just in case my daughter has a dairy and soy allergy similar to my son, so it gave me options postpartum, but you could definitely use butter here if you wanted. And then I also added in some chocolate chips as well, because who doesn't like chocolate chips in their granola bars? The last 2 things that I added were protein powder and brewer's yeast. Now, we use Jacko's protein powder. We drink that post-workout. We really like it because it doesn't have a ton of like added ingredients or kind of just like weird stuff going on, and they really prioritize making things in the US. We really like to support that brand. And brewer's yeast is really known to help with lactation. You'll see it in a lot of lactation cookies. So I threw them into this granola bar just to kind of help with that as well. Once you have all the ingredients added, you just want to give it a good mix and then put it into a baking dish. Now I chose a smaller one just to make them on the thicker side. You could definitely use a 9x13 as well. I do wish I put some parchment paper in. It didn't stick, but I think it would have been nicer to be able to pull out the whole frozen block and cut them into pieces and then put them in saran wrap. Currently, I just have it sitting in my freezer, and I admittedly have been already snacking on them. They are really good, but you just have to cut them out individually. So I would recommend putting some parchment paper down so that you can pull it out and cut them into bars. While we're waiting for the pot pie filling to cool, we're going to go ahead and make the pie crust. Now this is a sourdough pie crust, and I just put a little bit of sourdough starter, some flour, butter, and water, and a little bit of salt into a bowl, and I mixed it up, and now I'm going to knead it out. Now I always feel like I underwork my pie crust, and I think that's always a struggle for me. Pie crust is something I always am working on perfecting. I don't have the best technique, I'm sure, compared to other bakers. However, I still think that homemade pie crust tastes so much better than what's in the store, and you can also control all of the ingredients. After your dough has been sitting in the fridge for at least an hour, you can let it rest longer though, you will want to take it out and start to roll it out on some parchment paper. And I always put a little bit of flour down to help the rolling pin to not stick. And once it's about the diameter of the pie pan, you can gently flip it over onto the pie pan, and then you can scoop in your filling. Now the filling that we made, you can do about 2 full pot pies, so I just split the filling in half, and then I rolled out the other pie crust and I put it on top of the filling, and I just kind of pinched the pie crust together, and I put a few little slits on top so that when it bakes it has a little bit of air to escape. And then I just wrapped it with some saran wrap and tin foil to protect it from the freezer. Last but certainly not least, we're going to make some lactation cookies. So this is using a combination of oats and flour. Oats are really known to help with lactation. We're going to put some eggs in there, some butter, some dehydrated strawberries that I got from Costco, as well as some brewer's yeast. As I mentioned earlier, brewer's yeast is really great to help with lactation, postpartum. And then we're going to put in some cream cheese in there as well. So these are going to be kind of like a strawberry cheesecake cookie. And let me tell you, I baked one up just to test it out, and it was so dang good. It took all in me to not make the entire pan. But then after I mixed them all up, I just froze them into balls and put them into freezer bags so that I can just pop one out when I'm ready postpartum, and I can throw it into the oven one at a time. So I don't have to have all of these cookies made up, and they'll be fresh out of the oven when we're ready. And with that, our meal prep is done. I want to thank you so much for watching. If you liked this, please hit the like button, share with your friends, and don't forget to hit subscribe. We come out with new videos every week or so, and I would love to have you join us in the future.